What's up, guys? Coach Dave here with Condemned Labs. On the last video, we talked a little bit about HIIT cardio versus list cardio, fat burners, when to implement them, my opinions on the two. This video, we're going to talk about eating for burning body fat, improving body composition, and aesthetics. So I have a lot of tricks and tips that I implement with my clients for improving body composition. One of them is more frequent eating. A lot of times people get the assumption that the less food they take in, the more body fat they're going to burn, and sometimes that's not exactly true. Yes, you want to keep a caloric deficit, so calories in need to be less than the calories you're expending throughout the day, but you also don't want to force your body into starvation mode. So small, frequent feedings throughout the day, every 2.5 to 3 hours, low calorie meals, high protein, low to no carbohydrates, and moderate healthy fats seem to be a pretty standard formula for doing that. Now, again, every person's going to be a little different, so you want to implement different strategies depending on people's different body compositions. For instance, if you're doing fasted cardio first thing in the morning, you might want to leave carbohydrates out of breakfast so your body continues to burn body fat exclusively throughout that period of the day. Then you have a brief anabolic window midday when you do your training where you can implement small amounts of carbohydrates to make sure your body has enough muscle glycogen to contract and perform in the gym. And then again, restrict carbohydrates throughout the rest of the day because your body will again rely on body fat for a fuel source instead of carbohydrates. For people that might be a little bit more ectomorphic, you might want to incorporate a little bit more carbs throughout the day just so you run the risk of burning muscle glycogen or muscle tissue. If you're a little bit endomorphic, you might want to restrict carbs even more so you put yourself in a little bit more of a deficit and you try to rely on body fat as a fuel source versus carbohydrates.
But what's it called? So if it's technically if it's just calories in versus calories out, right? So just like the net of the day, then why is it that the meal frequency would have to be high?
All right, so some people do ask that question. Why do you eat more smaller frequent meals versus having 1 to 2 or 3 bigger meals if it's just calories in versus calories out? And it's a little bit more specific or a little bit more scientific than that. Your body can only metabolize and utilize a certain amount of calories at a specific time. So if you overload your digestive system with a tremendous amount of calories, there's a good chance that your body's not going to be able to metabolize and utilize it all at that specific moment, and you're going to run the risk of storing more for body fat. So let's just say your specific caloric requirements were 3,000 calories throughout the day, just to make it easy with the numbers, and you had 3,000 calorie meals. Your body might not efficiently digest, utilize, metabolize, and excrete the waste from that 1,000 calorie meal as if you had 2 500 calorie meals in its place. It's all about body efficiency and how it's going to metabolize and utilize calories. So you don't want to overload your digestive system with a tremendous amount of calories at one time that your body might not be able to utilize in that specific time window. You also don't want to go too long without putting amino acids into your bloodstream. The standard time roughly for amino acids circulating in the bloodstream is about 3 hours. That's why we tend to eat every 3 hours. So we keep a specific supply of amino acids in the blood at all times to rebuild and repair muscle. I believe protein is probably the most important macronutrient. It's the only one that you can't store. The only way you store that is in muscle tissue. So so fat and carbohydrates can be more sporadically spaced throughout the day because you can store obviously glycogen in the muscle tissue in the liver and fat in your body fat stores. If you want to create, a state of hypertrophy and still be able to build, repair, and maintain muscle tissue, protein needs to be supplied throughout the body. Protein needs to be supplied to the body throughout the day.
Now, what's the difference between somebody's protein intake if they're off-season or bulking versus when someone's on prep or cutting?
So protein intake when you're cutting versus when you're bulking. When you're cutting, you want to have a higher protein intake. I mean, protein should be high at all times, but you want to make it a little higher when you're cutting if carbohydrates are going to be low. Because your body's going to require protein to obviously rebuild and repair muscle. And if you're getting ready for a competition or you want to preserve as much muscle as possible, you want to make sure your body has enough raw material and amino acids to rebuild and repair muscle all day long. Now, some of that protein is likely going to be converted to glycogen if your carbohydrates are very, very low. So you want to make sure that you're not taking away from the protein that's used to build muscle to break it down to use for glycogen if you need to maintain blood sugar levels. Now, in an off-season scenario where all calories are high and you're taking a tremendous amount of protein, carbohydrates, and fats, protein can be a little lower because there's a much less likely chance that any of it's going to be converted or diverted from building muscle to any other biological functions. So there are such things as thermogenic foods that do require more calories to break down and utilize than they actually give you. I don't know how much of a difference they're going to make in a competition prep or a cutting program, but they definitely don't hurt. So eating thermogenic foods, adding lemon to your water or things like broccoli or some asparagus that do take more calories to break down and burn than they're actually going to give you can help you catabolize a little extra calories here and there. But I don't think it's going to be the difference maker in first place and second place in the competition, and I don't think it's going to be a big difference in any kind of cutting program. Touching on diet again for fat loss, competition, or just a cutting program, a big technique that I like to implement is carb cycling. And what that means is varying your carbohydrate intake per day. So if you're training, let's say, weak body part or something that requires high amount of intensity like legs, you might want to have a higher carbohydrate day on that day so you have the suitable amount of fuel to train that muscle. On a day that you're off or training a smaller body part, you might want to have less amount of carbohydrates because your body's not going to require so much fuel and you run a much less risk of storing any of those carbohydrates as body fat. Now, not training around a workout or not carb cycling around a workout, you can really implement high, medium, low, 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 high, no carb, low carb, high carb. It's a dozen different combinations you can implement, and the strategy behind them is tricking your body into thinking that it's not dieting. If you suppress carbohydrates for too long, you run the risk of suppressing your thyroid hormone, not converting T4 to T3, T4 being the inactive form of thyroid hormone, T3 being the active form of thyroid hormone, which converts in the blood and in the liver. And carbohydrates and insulin is a big part of that T4 to T3 conversion. So if you do restrict carbohydrates for too long, or you go on a ketogenic diet for too long, you will suppress your metabolism, you will slow down your thyroid hormone conversion, and you will probably stall out and stop burning body fat. So implementing a cheat meal, a high carb day, a refeed day, or carb cycling are all techniques to avoid that from happening. I hope you guys found some of these tricks and tips useful for burning body fat, eating to burn body fat, or to compete. This is Coach Dave with Condemn Labs. If you have any questions on any of these things I talked about today, you could DM me, and I'll be glad to answer them for you. I'll see you on the next video. Coach Dave with Condemn Labs.